But I know that it was, during the Trump administration, when the Doha Agreement was made, and administration officials at that time suggested to Congress that the Taliban's views on women and girls had changed. Clearly that is not. And though that there have been some small spaces that were created for women and girls in Afghanistan, the Taliban has dramatically curtailed their freedom, so that I don't think that there's any question of that. So I guess the question I have for any of you is, what drives the Taliban's leadership to continue to place these limitations on the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan? And within those constructs, where do you see the potential opportunity to advance the rights of women and girls in the country as we speak?
Thank you, Representative Meeks. If I might take that question. And thank you for putting the situation of women and girls in the spotlight. It is the worst situation in the world. There's no country in the world that deprives girls of education beyond the secondary level. And it is a situation that we have called attention to in all of our public statements at every level of our leadership. In terms of what drives the Taliban would like to make the claim that this is based on religious grounds or cultural grounds. Those have been countered both by Muslim majority countries who have said that this is contrary to the practices of any Islamic country, and it has also been countered by the Afghan population that have roundly condemned the practices of the Taliban. And men and women, tribal communities, elders, families, fathers have said they want their daughters educated, and they want them to be able to have the opportunity to work. Afghanistan is a country that is driven more by pragmatism than by ideology, and certainly not the extreme ideology that the Taliban present. The ways that we support Afghan women and girls is, first, we amplify the voices of Afghan women themselves. They are their best advocates. They are their strongest advocates. Not only do we amplify their voices through our mechanisms, such as the U.S. Afghan Consultative Mechanism, but we encourage every country that is working on Afghanistan to and make sure that they include Afghan women when they are engaging on the situation of Afghanistan. We encourage everyone to tell the Taliban publicly and privately in very emphatic terms that so long as they continue these practices, there will be no movement forward in normalization of relations. And finally, we believe that it's absolutely critical to empower Afghans themselves, who are going to be ultimately the force that will change these policies. Because the Taliban can say that they're going to ignore the international community. They cannot ignore the Afghan people. The people that we invested in for the last 2 decades are still the people that we need to invest in today. And with that, I'll turn to my colleague.
Becky, I see I'm out of time, but thank you for your questions. Your answers, I should say. We appreciate your work.
Thank you very much, Congressman Greg Meeks, and the ranking member. We're so grateful. We are both proud natives of South Carolina, but he's really done well. He represents Queens, and so we're really proud of that success of Greg Meeks. We now proceed to Congressman Dr. Rich McCormick of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As an Afghan veteran, I would openly state that I think our withdrawal from Afghanistan was an abject failure and probably the worst in our history. I'm a history teacher of evolutionary warfare here in the United States and amphibious warfare, and so as a student of the game, I think we've dissected that enough. So I'm going to move on to some of the more germane things that I'm worried about here and that apply to your experiences. According to the January 5th Reuters article, ISIS, based in Afghanistan, was responsible for the most recent suicide bombings in Iran that killed nearly 100 people. In addition to that, we have well-documented instances of how the Afghan Taliban are treating their female population, which we're all abhorred by. Reports are that the Taliban have harbored ISIS and al-Qaeda leaders since our withdrawal, and of course we know there are easily over 20 terrorist bases for training in Afghanistan that we know of. All that said, in October, we looked at the Afghanistan government and announced its plan to become formally part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and request to become part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Obviously bad players. Now the Taliban, though, according to my information, the CIGAR testified in November that 37 NGOs reported that they provided a total of $10.1 million in taxes and fees to the Taliban. That's from us. The problem I have with the way that we're running our coordination with the CIGAR is that when Mr. West, when you said, I think, and I quote, Al-Qaeda is at their lowest capability in Afghanistan in decades, which I heard when I first came in, all those things I just stated are still true. And it doesn't diminish the fact that they are actually building a presence that's literally in contrast to every single thing we're trying to achieve, both in Afghanistan and globally in our strategic initiatives, in my opinion. And the other thing that you said, I think, and I'm not going to paraphrase on this, but that you did an excellent job in responding to the CIGAR responses to their questions. But I think there's a big difference between a response and being responsive. And I want to go over a couple things that have been presented to me as evidence of what I think is in contrary to what you just stated. We have 30 outstanding requests for information by the state that you have yet to fully comply with, which affects the ability of the CIGAR to accomplish their initiatives. The state's rationale for not providing this information seems unreasonable to me, at least. In some cases, blatantly absurd because it suggests the desire to obstruct the CIGAR itself, and that it seems to be coming from our own State Department. I don't understand what that purpose is or why we're not complying with something that literally inhibiting them to be able to get information that's unclassified to do their job. Why would we possibly have a reason to obstruct the very agency that we appointed to get to the bottom of the problem? Why would we work against ourselves for accountability? It makes no sense to me. I think that when we talk about this frivolous rationale that was used by the state to justify this delays in responsiveness, they even used the Freedom of Information Act exemption to justify withholding information from the auditor. That makes no sense to me, and I'd like your response on that in a second. I'm gonna pile on here. I only have 5 minutes. I got to get this all out. But basically, I didn't understand also why the department has now placed the restrictions on the unclassified information, everything else. I don't understand. We have an obviously bad actor. We have an accountability agent. We're giving money to bad actors. And then the state is literally saying, I don't want you to have the response you need or the information you need to do your job. Can you respond?
Thank you. These are important questions. So first, I'll offer an example of the kind of concern we have. We don't want any information about our implementing partners out there in the public domain that's going to put a target on them inside Afghanistan.
When you say implementing partners, what are you referring to?
I'm not going to get into specifics about exactly which the organizations we rely on to deliver humanitarian aid. So CIGAR has a job, right? And
like USA?
We respect. But we want to be sure that if they want to talk directly to our implementing partners, that they respect the absolute sensitivity of that information. Because if they publish it, the Taliban can read, and they can then target those organizations for their activity. That's one example. As I said to the chairman, I'll look into these 30 outstanding requests. It's a fair question. Let me turn to my colleague on this question as well.
Certainly, just to add to what Special Representative West offered, we fully agree with the importance of oversight and accountability for all of our work. We are fully cooperating with CIGAR. We've had something like 370 engagements with CIGAR over the past year or so. I will get you the exact number. We have teams here in Washington and with our Afghan Affairs unit overseas that are dedicated to producing material in response to all of their questions and doing so in a production schedule that both we and CIGAR find workable. As the Special Representative offered, There have been times when we've had to negotiate out some of the questions where we have concerns because of the potential risk that the provision of certain information would create for the Afghan people. We've been able to do that successfully, but sometimes that has resulted in a process that's been slower than we're satisfied with, and certainly than I think at times Cigar has been satisfied with. But I've met with Mr. Sopko, as my colleague has, several times, had very good positive conversations, and we are doing our utmost, given how important it is for us to be responsible to the American taxpayer, to make sure that we are providing Cigar with all of the information that it needs so that it can help us do our job better and help support this committee as well.
So I'm out of time. I'm just going to make the statement that you and the Cigar have a different opinion of the experience you're having with each other. And I think that's important to note, that if the one accountability agency we have that represents us, the people, if you will, and our representatives, if they're not satisfied, that means we're not satisfied. So I hope we do a better job.
Thank you, Dr. Rich McCormick. We now proceed to Congressman Brad Sherman of California.
Picking up on what the gentleman from Georgia said, I think he's entitled to answers if they can't be provided publicly. Mr. Schiffer, will you give him or the full subcommittee a classified briefing answering his questions?
Certainly be happy to come up and talk to the committee. I can assure you that we have been able to provide Mr. Sopko with and his...
We have several skiffs right in this building.
Yeah, we have been able to provide him with responses to all of the questions.
We're reclaiming my time. I've got to let them. We went to Afghanistan to get bin Laden. We got him. We would have gotten him sooner if we hadn't focused too much on Iraq. We are prepared to take whatever military action is necessary in Afghanistan to prevent it from being a source of a mass casualty attack on the United States. So far, the various forces in Afghanistan seem to be more focused on killing each other. We went to Afghanistan for a second reason, one we never voted on, and that was to seek to remake Afghanistan society. Historians will have to tell us whether that was ever possible to do. Clearly, we failed to do it. We then had a President Trump who promised the American people that we'd get out of what he classified as a forever war. He was clever in that he gave the promise of the withdrawal before the election, intending to do the withdrawal after the election, because there's no such thing as an orderly withdrawal under those circumstances. We did not have an orderly withdrawal from Saigon. Our military complex told us we'd have an orderly withdrawal because they believed that since the Afghan army could fight the Taliban successfully for 3 to 6 months, that they would, which is absurd to think that the average grunt in the Afghan army is going to lay down his life while the leaders of the country and those most connected to the United States are trying desperately to leave Afghanistan. So, of course, there was a disorderly withdrawal, and then we have the attacks from the other side saying somehow we should have gone through Afghanistan, an enormous country, and taken our weapons back from the people who wanted to continue holding them, but do it all with no American casualties. So we left. We now have, and one have failed to acknowledge, that we have very limited power at all. We care more about the Afghan people and the Taliban, certainly the half of the Afghan people who are women. We can threaten to cut off aid. The Taliban may not care at all. We could bomb Taliban military targets, but I think that's absurd. The United States is not in a mood to do that. We are told that we're going to make them a pariah in the international community, but they've got no reason or little reason to care. And China and Russia, who is certainly part of the international community, and they'll be very happy to do business with the Taliban. We have seen our aid interrupted because, or might be interrupted because we know it's being stolen. I'll point to Tigray, where our aid was being stolen by criminals. We didn't like to see that. We interrupted. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people died because we didn't want to see our aid stolen. I'm much more concerned about our aid being stolen by terrorists than stolen by economically driven criminals. We have it's commented that we should somehow prevent Taliban officers from visiting Russia and China. Gee, I don't know how we're supposed to do that. We'd like to believe that the Afghan people share our values, and certainly those Afghans we talk to tend to share our values. But the fact is that in over 20 years, and with all the money that any Afghan could ever imagine on one side, and the ideology of the Taliban on the other, we lost. We are told that we have a moral obligation to the Afghan people. I think we have a moral obligation to everyone in the entire world. But the idea of taking the most generous country in the world, the country who's sent its men and women to die by the thousands to help other countries, has some sort of guilt for its involvement in Afghanistan, from which it derives a moral obligation of the Afghan people greater than that of China or Norway, I think is simply wrong. When we went into Afghanistan, things were terrible, and they had a civil war, and the 90% of Afghanistan women who are under the Taliban were as repressed then as they are now. We didn't break Afghanistan. It was broken when we got there. Now, the Afghan government is seeing hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of people deported from Pakistan. It has fought a little border skirmish with Iran over water. How does Afghanistan get along with its neighbors?
Thank you for that question. You know, the relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban at the moment is it's not good. The Pakistanis are extremely worried, as they've made clear publicly, about this sharp increase in attacks against their security forces. Just in recent days, there have been senior members of the Taliban that have visited Islamabad and seen senior leadership. You know, I don't have great insight into whether that's a reflection of perhaps actions by the Taliban to crack down on TTP, but this security issue is, I think, dominating the Taliban's relationship with Pakistan, Pakistan's relationship with one of its neighbors. To the north, I'll give you just one example of Uzbekistan. Among the difficult issues that Uzbekistan has in its relationship with the Taliban is over a particular canal that the Taliban are seeking to build in the north that could divert large percentages of the Amu Darya River that supports tens of thousands of Uzbeks as well as Turkmen. So that's one issue. At the same time, the Uzbeks are generously providing electricity that supports the Afghan people. And so is even Tajikistan. And Tajikistan itself, I think, within the region has the most concerns about Taliban activity inside Afghanistan. On Iran, again, you know, the Iranians, like every other country in the region, they have an embassy in Kabul. They have a special envoy, and they probably have steep security concerns as well, particularly in the aftermath of this attack.
Do they fault the Taliban for not controlling anti-Shiite mass murders like those we saw explode a bomb just a few days ago in Iran?
Yes, I think they probably have concerns about, look, I don't want to talk for Iran, but any country that's attacked, I think they would have concerns about the ability of a neighbor to take action to ensure those attacks don't happen.
I've gone way over. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Sherman. We now proceed to Congressman Brian Mast of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Taliban, ISIS-K run Afghanistan today?
I would not say that ISIS-K runs Afghanistan today, no.
They run a portion of it. They run as a level of authority in some places.
You know, what we're finding with ISIS-K is they are largely choosing to keep a low profile and then execute attacks in cities as well as outside the country. They're not...
Taliban, yes.
The Taliban, I think, you know, I don't want to step into territory around anything to do with recognition, but
Taliban runs it enough that we don't want to give money to the Afghan central bank.
I think the Taliban are in control of the Afghan central bank as well as other institutions, yes.
Okay, you familiar with the name Shah Rabi?
Yes.
He's one of the 4 board members, one of the co-chairs.
That's correct.
Of the Afghan fund, $3.5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Who was in charge of vetting Shah Rabi?
So the process that we followed entailed having consistent with the Federal Reserve Act. We certified this person who was put forward by the accredited representative of Afghanistan at the time.
Who put him forward?
The accredited representative of Afghanistan at the
Credit representative of Afghanistan?
Accredited representative of
Who's that?
Afghanistan.
The accredited representative of Afghanistan.
I'd be very glad to talk to you in another setting, in a public setting, given, I think, quite legitimate security concerns. I don't want to speak further.
But you don't want to say who the accredited representative of Afghanistan?
I'd be happy to speak with you in a classified setting.
You could just say no. I don't want to answer that. You don't want to say who the accredited representative of Afghanistan is?
I'd be happy to speak with
just
you in a classified
no.
setting.
Don't do the Washington, D.C. BS. Just say no or yes. Was Shah Rabi fired from Mary Washington College for, let's just say, misrepresenting his credentials, saying he was a doctor when he was not?
These allegations we were not aware of.
But just
when
was
the process
today,
went forward.
was he?
It wouldn't have changed our, I think, determination in the end.
It wouldn't have changed your determination to appoint him as a co-chair, elevate him from board member to co-chair of this, had you known that he was fired from a college for saying he was a doctor and he wasn't. That wouldn't have changed. That really goes, I really don't have to ask a lot more because it really goes to the heart of what I wanted to get at of what's going on at State Department about the vetting of individuals. The idea that you would say, yes, we weren't totally aware of what went on with this individual, misrepresenting their credentials, being fired from previous universities, saying that they were a member of an honor society, things that, these are allegations that we haven't asked you about all of them, you haven't confirmed all of them, but you're saying it wouldn't have changed what took place. That's disturbing to me, number one. But it really goes to another question. You said that you acknowledge Taliban runs Afghanistan, or in large part, and certainly has control of the central bank. Shah Rabi is also a board member of the Afghan Central Bank. So what does that say about his connections to the Taliban?
I think our assessment is that he is not under the thumb of or controlled by the Taliban. I mean, he's an American citizen. He teaches at Montgomery College. He's had a decades-long career. That's an advisory position.
He's had a decades-long career and has been fired for misrepresenting his work from the places that he has had careers in. I don't know the entire history of that, and I'd like to hear more about it from you all, perhaps in another setting. But he is a board member of the Afghan Central Bank, on one hand, that you just acknowledged is controlled by the Taliban. So if you want to be a board member there, you got to be in cahoots with the Taliban. You would add up to most people. And we appointed him as a part of this entity in Switzerland, one of 4 people that's going to control $3.5 billion on behalf of the United States of America to determine if this goes back to the Afghanistan Central Bank. That seems moronic to me. And it seems like an absolute conflict of interest. Is he getting paid as a board member of either of those?
No.
He doesn't get paid as a board member of the Afghan Central Bank?
No.
He doesn't get paid as a board member of the Afghan Fund?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, and so to go on just one more time, do you know, was he fired from Washington College?
I saw the allegations that Cigar brought to our attention. We were not aware of them before they were brought to our attention. I haven't talked to
remaining
Washington
second,
College.
thank you. I'm sorry I'm running out of time because I would want to hear from you more. I really don't want to just interrupt you.
No problem.
I do want to submit
Go
something
ahead.
for the record, Mr. Chairman, and that's this letter from Cigar stating that state did respond to many requests for information for ongoing audits. However, there is a difference between simply responding to the request and providing fulsome answers to our questions. That's directly from Cigar about State Department's response to them and how they are being not cooperative. Please submit that for the record.
Without objection and enthusiastically so ordered.